welcome to episode 4. But before we start, remember to go off the grid, be open and dive deep. Today we're going to be uncovering personal worship. We believe that there is so much that God wants to reveal to you through worship in this season. It's been months since we last gathered, and by the looks of it, I don't think we're going to be gathering anytime soon. So with everything now online, the aspect of worship looks really different for all of us. It seems as though it's lost its hype. So without the moshing and without a worship team leading right in front of us, what do we do now? And what is worship anyways? Well, worship means to give God your undivided attention through admiration and showing what His worth is to you. To worship Him no matter what season you're in, no matter where you are, it means to have a personal moment with the one who has set you free. As believers, we're called to worship. In Deuteronomy 10 verse 21, it talks about God being the only one worthy of our praise. And so as we're about to share with you 3 points, we encourage you to lean in. So to start us off, we have one of our awesome leaders who is also an awesome worship leader, Marvel.
Thanks, Nora. For myself, what I love most about worship is that we can have a worship sesh literally any time of the day. You could be out for a jog, or you could be up late at night studying. It doesn't have to look a particular way. So let's get into it. Here are 3 truths about worship in this season. Point number 1, hype is temporary, worship is everlasting. Whenever we think of worship or fusion, we tend to think of hype, mosh pit, sound and lighting effects. But if we were to take this all away, what would our worship really be worth? How much would we be giving to worship God? In John 12, it talks about this exact thing. A woman named Mary broke open a very expensive jar of perfume and anointed Jesus' feet with this. Judas, one of the disciples, then questioned this and basically said, "Why this waste?" You see, Judas didn't know anything about Mary's story or her past or what Jesus had done for her, because this was the same Mary whose brother Lazarus was raised from the dead. Judas had seen a moment, but there was so much more to Mary's worship. Her worship wasn't confined to only what Jesus had done for her in one moment, but rather for who He was. Her worship was everlasting. Fusion, it's so easy for us to get caught up with camp hype, for encounters to occur when we're all gathered together under one roof, but worship is more than this. In this season, our level of worship is down to us. There's no stage, there's no lights, no tracks, no instruments. Worship comes in many forms. It's not complicated, it's not confined to listening to worship songs, but the true heart of worship is expressing how worthy God is of our praise. Like that expensive jar of perfume, our worship to God should be over the top and wasteful. It should cost us something. This season, maybe it's your pride getting in the way. Maybe it's going out of your way to have a personal worship session in your bedroom or when you go for a walk. Maybe it's changing your home culture and engaging with church at home worship. Maybe it's starting your day with the Word and some worship songs. Your worship cannot be defined, cannot be validated by somebody else. We can get so hyped about our favourite sport teams, music releases, shoe releases, but with all this, it will all fade away. At the end of the day, God calls us and asks us, "When was the last time you worshipped me?" Hype is temporary, worship is everlasting. Point number 2, worship is not about perfection, it is about surrender. I'm going to be honest with you guys, worshipping in isolation has been such a struggle for me. When we have Sunday services on, I struggle to worship like how we would all together when we're at church. During this isolation period, my relationship with God hasn't been in a good place. Sometimes we may think our worship needs to look a certain way or that we need to be a certain way to worship God, but this is not God's heart for us. He calls us to come to Him with our mess, with our burdens, with our struggles, and lay it all at His feet. Matthew 11:28-29 says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Fusion, there'll be so many times where we mess up in our life, where we don't get things right, but God will still wait for us with open arms. Worship is not about perfection, but true surrender to God. It is acknowledging that we are sinners, but God paid our debt, that He has given us grace in abundance. I was going through a really low point around 2 weeks ago, where I was completely ignoring my devotions and I felt very distant to God. I hadn't listened to worship music for a long time, but in that moment, I'd put this song on and these words had really encouraged me. It said, "He's not moved by perfection or how well we look the part, but he's wild about the hidden stuff, like he's wild about the heart." You know, God isn't chasing perfection, he's chasing our heart. We live in a world so easily distracted by social media, by friends, by everything that's going on around us. But sometimes the best thing for us to do is just to slow down, take a deep breath, and clear our mind to focus on God. If you struggle to focus on God in this season, we want you to join us on Sunday night at 8 p.m. for God Space. In this, you'll learn how to clear all distractions and really focus in on what God wants to reveal to you. Through this time, we will teach you how to truly worship in this season, and it will look different. We have to be ready to embrace it. For more details, or if you have any questions, please reach out to your REVS leader.
That was so good. Thanks, Marvel. So our third and final point is your next encounter is just as powerful as your last one. Being in isolation has resulted in all of us worshipping God in our own time and in our own space, but maybe you've been putting off the idea of worshipping because you think it's awkward or not powerful like how it would be if you were at Fusion, church, or even at camp. To be honest, I struggled to worship in front of a screen, and I truly thought that I wasn't going to encounter God until lockdown was over. But the emptiness I felt when I didn't worship resulted in me having to be comfortable with what was at first uncomfortable and just worship. You see, Fusion, we can't wait for the moment we get back to church to worship again. But until then, God can meet us wherever we are. And a great example of that is the story of Paul and Silas. Despite them being in prison, they began to worship. And moments after that, in Acts 16 verse 26, it says, "Suddenly there was a massive earthquake, and the prison was shaken to its foundations. All the doors immediately flew open, and the chains of every prisoner fell off." You see, Fusion, we shouldn't limit our worship to certain places or certain moments. Even in lockdown, powerful worship moments can still take place. Your next encounter is just as powerful as your last one. Just to recap, our 3 points are: hype is temporary, worship is everlasting. Worship is not perfection, it is surrender. And your next encounter is just as powerful as your last one. Now we're going to be splitting off into our REVS groups. Remember to go off the grid, be open, and dive deep. Enjoy your discussions. Bye, Fusion.